parents and supporters of your own schools, does this partnership seem to make sense, and what are some ideas that you'd like us to consider as well? Following all this, we'll have a reception outside near the aquariums, I believe, right? So please hang around, and are we doing a great thing in schools? And for a long time, we've been resting on our laurels. And there's a point in time where a lot of policymakers and educators were thinking about, are we going in the right direction, or are we slowly looking into mediocrity? This is a point in time in 1983, right, in the early 80s, when globalization was becoming something we had to really pay attention to. Our SAT scores were slipping, and there's a few other indicators. And so A Nation at Risk was this major report that came out. And it was another one of those Sputnik moments in education. Back in the late 50s, when the Soviet Union put Sputnik up in space, we didn't just have the space race to begin, but we also started with the space race and the Apollo program. We also started looking at how do we teach science and math. And so in the early 60s and mid-60s, there was this wonderful fervor of creating great curriculum material and teach professional development and all sorts of stuff that was going that way. And this report sort of started another renaissance in that. Because after this report came out, state education officials, principals, teachers, people that think a lot about science started getting together. The National Research Council, which is an arm of the National Academy of Science, they started really looking at how do we teach science and what should the science learning be that we're doing in schools. So they put together various commissions. There's opportunities for a lot of us to comment on this, and finally in the mid-90s, 1994, what we would consider our first National Science Education Standards was published by the NRC, by the National Research Council. At the same time, there is a group called AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science. That's a professional organization of scientists. It's the largest professional organization of scientists in the world. And they were deeply interested in the state of science education. So they came out with a report called Science for All Americans, trying to sort of tease out what does complete science literacy look like. When a child is 18, graduates from high school, what should they know and be able to do? And that led to what they call their benchmarks program, benchmarks for science literacy, is basically their standards of what a K-12 curriculum should look like. So back in the 90s, after a lot of thinking, two major reports, the National Science Education Standards from the Academy of Science and from AAAS, Benchmarks for Science Literacy. Those basically became the framework, the blueprint, that every state then got down to work and started putting together their own statewide standards. So Vermont puts together their frameworks for science and inquiry, and New Hampshire puts together their frameworks. Vermont published their frameworks in 2000. New Hampshire published a second iteration of theirs in 2006. And at the same time, the National Research Council is now re-looking at all the standards and what we're doing in science classes. And just last year, they published their new framework for K-12 science education. And it's from that new framework that a group of 26 states have gotten together. And between state policymakers and head departments and teachers and university professors and folks like myself started putting together a new framework that is called the Next Generation Science Standards. And the first draft that came out just last Friday. So 30 years of thinking about what are we doing in schools. And during that time, the Academy of Science has been doing a lot of continuous research and follow-up. So out came the inquiry. What does inquiry look like? How can you tell it's good inquiry? And so if you're a teacher, this is a wonderful document to be familiar with. They looked at exactly what is happening. They came out with a document in about 6 years ago called Taking Science to School, which was a pretty hard look at what's happening in school after all this work. So we all have state standards, and yet there's still not too much moving forward in most schools. And then more recently came out with Ready Set Science, which is just how do you put this research and understanding of the science of learning science into practice. And I mention these things because the work that we're doing is not in a vacuum. It's not in a void. But at the same time, as we've been going through this past 30 years, the country is now saying, along with other countries, saying, how do we measure up? How do we do compared to the other countries in the world? And so there's two international assessments that our country participates in regarding science. One is known as PISA, which is a program for international student assessment. And it assesses reading, math, and science. Another one is called the TIMSS assessment, or the TIMSS test, and that's Trends in International Math and Science Study. The TIMSS test is very content-heavy, and a lot of thinkers will sort of poo-poo it. You know, it's just how much knowledge have you remembered. The PISA test is actually a really nice assessment. It's not just about the content knowledge and the concepts that students understand. And it's tested with 15-year-olds, and they use the test every 3 years. 76 or so countries take part in the test. It also includes a nice problem-solving section. So can you actually take a problem, turn it around, look at it, and figure out how to solve it? Okay? As best as you can do on a standardized assessment. It's pretty nice. And it's something that we care about. So how are we doing? 30 years of thinking about what we're doing in science and education. We're not where we should be. We're not where we want to be. We're at the place where we can end up saying, we're going to have future scientists and engineers who are going to help solve our technical problems and our health problems. We're not at a place where we say, yes, the future democracy of this country is going to be in good hands because people are going to be able to think and take the science and technology issues that are so relevant and important to society and understand them and turn them around. We're not there. We are ahead of Portugal and just behind Greece. Okay. So in the meantime, for the last 3 decades, the Montshire has been working in schools and has had a lot of science education programs. And as David mentioned, we're really proud. I think the programs that we end up doing here at the museum, whether it's what we call, sort of our bread and butter programs of great model lessons. School group comes and one of our professional educators, myself or Mike or someone in the department, we're all professional teachers, are working with that class for an hour. And we feel like that is like the cat's meow lesson. And as David mentioned, I will hold up the work that we do here with schools and our teaching to any other science organization in the country. And we have kids in these programs that kids are doing. They're observing, they are thinking, they're questioning. We give them opportunities to write down and use their literacy skills to help make meaning of their science. I mean, heck, we have kindergartners learning how to graph data. It may be how many pennies they can float, but they're making bar graphs and able to make those graphs and represent their data and interpret that data. Right? Good stuff. We have opportunities in our programs where kids get to use their literacy skills, to talk with each other about what they wrote, to share with each other, to make meaning of their learning, of their doing science. And we spend an inordinate amount of time designing exhibits that are open-ended in a way that families and students and peer groups and adults can come and mess with something, look at it, see what they can do, have a question, turn it around and begin to answer that question, right? Engage in science. So I think our programs are really good. They are truly engaging and exciting and helping people work with real phenomena and real content. A great science program, and this is what we're looking for. We're looking for great science programs where kids have the opportunity to be engaged in inquiry, where they can practice what we call the science process skills, the ED jargon, which means all the things you need to know how to do science. How do you observe? How do you measure? How do you collect data? How do you graph? How do you interpret that graph? How do you share what you know? All that, right? We have kids and learners of all ages in our programs engaged in real phenomena, working with real content, real science. There's not the process skills over here and the content. No, they're laying on top of each other. And all that is building excitement and engagement in science. So I think they're really good. So over the weekend, as we're getting ready for this presentation, I went through some of our data on what schools do with us. And I just picked a random school that we work with. And I looked back on our calendar, our database, and this is one school. And this is one school and the work that they've done with us in the past 6 years. Each of the little blue dots or blue ovals refers to a visit plus workshop. Okay, so in 2006, this school had the 7th graders come here for an hour, and we did this whiz-bang, fabulous learning experience for an hour with those 7th graders, right? And you can see, where they did the other single workshops. You can see this little red long oval We had staff in their school for a day with our portable planetarium system, and the kids had this great Star Lab experience, and they went out the next night, and hopefully they saw Orion. And the little triangle there was one third-grade teacher who came to one of our professional development workshops. So 6 years of all the Montshire programs, and we basically have the episodic use of those programs by schools. And that's the problem we're trying to solve. That in itself, we really look at it and we're really hard on ourselves and say, so how important is it to have a science center in your community? And we say, oh, well, in 6 years, let's see, we spent 2 hours with 7th graders. You get it? So we need to figure out what can we do so we truly have a long-term impact on the students and on the communities in which we work. And several years ago, we sat down, we were thinking about this, and we talked with Noelle Vitt at Rivendell Interstate School District. She was the head of schools at that time there. And we were thinking, okay, Noelle, we have this great museum with these science-rich resources, people that think about science teaching and learning, exhibits that are well-designed and crafted, materials that include curriculum and science equipment, all the wonderful stuff in the Montshire. And we have teachers that have great experience in the classroom. They are experts at how to work with kids in the classroom, right? So if we put these two things together, how do we put these two things together so that in the long term, in the long run, we actually make real impact? And while we're working in Rivendell schools for the first 2 years of this project, we're working with a couple of evaluators, an evaluation team out of California, in-earnest evaluation. And they very quickly said, Greg, you guys are on the right track here. There's really good stuff happening. And you got this background. But a piece of the puzzle is not that it's just the Montshire and a teacher, or the Montshire and teachers. It's looking at the whole school. It's looking at the capacity of schools. What we're finding is that schools, especially small, rural, under-resourced schools, are lacking the materials that they have to teach science. They lack the time and the expertise for professional development. They lack the infrastructure that's required to support a great science program. And the more I think about this and back on that 30-year history of where the country's been, we always look at a lot of programs of education as a very sort of one-dimensional lens. Oh, we're not doing very well in the international test scores, so we need to create professional development, and the teachers will teach it, and then we'll have students that do better on the test. And it's a very one-dimensional piece. And it's not only so one-dimensional, it's also often short-lived. This year we're doing, whole writing, and then you throw it away. The next year you're moving on to math, and you bring in a math consultant, and then you throw that away. And there's this idea that we put enough energy in, and then we leave. Or that if it's just in one little piece, that's the answer. And I'm beginning to think that we need to start looking at learning more like the way we look at the ecology of an area. So this particular species, this is a spotted salamander. It's totally opposite animal, right? It's about 6 inches long. So big salamander. It's jet black with bright yellow spots on it. And if you haven't seen one of these things before, you say, oh my gosh, that must have come from like the Amazon basin. I don't know. We walk over these things all the time when we're walking through the rich deciduous woods with a nice forest floor with leaf litter and rotting vegetation and bugs and grubs underneath, because that's where these guys live. Okay? They're known as the mole salamander group. Right? They burrow under the ground for most of their adult life, and they eat grubs and worms and that kind of stuff. But like any species, to have a healthy life, it doesn't just need a healthy underground. To have a healthy underground, it needs a healthy deciduous forest. For the healthy deciduous forest, it needs the light energy coming from the sun. The whole ecosystem. And not only that, being an amphibian, it spends part of its life in the forest. And it spends the other part of its life, a small part of its life, every mid-April, early April, just as the snow has melted. Right? Those first 2 days of hard rain, and your marshes and ponds are like 80% ice-free. These guys move down, they migrate up to 500 meters or so out of the forest to a vernal pool. A pool that filled up because hopefully there was enough snow melt. If enough snow melt and filled in this little depression, you have a vernal pool that doesn't last very long. They form later eggs, and now of course a lot of these need all the nutrients and the right chemistry in the water for the larvae to survive when they hatch and grow into matures. Okay. Complex life cycle. But more importantly, in order to do well, they need a complete ecosystem. Not just a curriculum, right? Not just professional development. They need it all. And I think what we've been missing in the last 30 years is to look at learning. It doesn't matter what subject, but to look at learning more like an ecology. How do we make sure that we are providing all the different pieces when we're looking at a child's education? And I would even venture that we shouldn't be looking at K-12, right? We need to be looking at pre-K to 20 in the formal system, okay? And beyond that, we need to look at lifelong learning. But there was a recent study that came out that talked about the infinitesimally small amount of time that people actually spend in the classroom. Most of our learning does not occur in the classroom. And if we only look at the classroom, right there, we're going to go back the wrong way. So we're looking at creating a new model for supporting schools that is much more in-depth and much more rich and long-term and has a continuous set of energies put into the system. And the premise of this model is that we're looking at working with small rural schools, often under-resourced. We're looking at working with a long-term relationship, not just something that lasts for a year or two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, right? There's a relationship there that's meaningful, it's impactful. How do we help teachers and schools take advantage of those wonderful resources of Montshire at the time that makes the most sense? So with more purpose and more intent and more design, so they fit the curriculum straight. It needs to have a richness, a complexity to it, like an ecology to it, of all the inputs that we're putting into the program. We need to figure out where to put in that little tug, those little pieces of effort, okay? The residence model, metaphor. And it needs to be a living model. We need to look at this every year and say, how are we doing? What can we change? How can we improve? Improvement never ends. So if we do this, here's what my model looks like. And I'm starting in the middle. The middle of my model, I'm going about not reading it, but that basically says increase student enthusiasm and understanding for science. That's what it's about. How do we get kids excited and understanding science? Our work here at the museum, okay, our department, that's not who we work with immediately. Because there's not enough of us, and there's not enough money for us to become your substitute science teachers. That's not our goal, right? So in order for this to happen, what do we need? We need to increase quality of learning experience that are available to students in the school, okay? So that's the teacher's job, right? And in order for teachers to be doing that, then we need to help build the capacity for the school to support the teachers to do that. And that's our ring. That's where we come in, okay? That's where we have the collaboration with the faculty, the administration, to figure out how can we all work together so that schools' infrastructure, their capacity to support great science education is strengthened. And to do that, we've come up with 5 sort of major areas of strategies, 5 different pieces. One piece is professional development. Okay, which is sort of an obvious. Professional development for teachers, both around content and around methodology. Another piece is curriculum support. How do we create new curriculum? How do we support curriculum with curriculum that's already published? How do we help teachers understand that? How do we connect the curriculum to the research of the museum? Another piece is creating a teacher network. For this to be sustainable, we need the teachers in these small schools, teach them. What's the student body teaching right now, Hank?
K through 6, we're right at 30.
30, okay? So it's hard for the 5th grade teacher to walk across the hall and teach them to the 3 other 5th grade teachers saying, exactly how do you do this with electricity? I'm not sure, right? Okay? So we need great teacher networks across our schools so they can support each other. And we also need to provide professional development and capacity building for us. for our own staff here at the museum. How do we do our work better? And lastly, and most importantly, and something that we think is really unique about our program, is we need to take advantage of the museum, of the physical space that the museum provides, our 100 acres of trails along the Connecticut River, our exhibits, our resources, and make that museum a home away from home for the schools we're working with, an extension of their campus, so that students know how to use the museum, so that students are participating in our programs here after school, during the summer, so that when field trips happen with these partnership schools, they're happening in a meaningful way. We have community nights. A couple weeks ago, we had the Riverdale Schools, 200 kids and parents and grandparents and uncles were here on a random Thursday night, and they had the museum to themselves to celebrate science as a way of building the community support for the sciences happening in their communities. So those are some of the pieces, or the major pieces. A few quick examples. Professional development for teachers. That is around, some of it is around content. In this case, the density of liquids. It's pretty cool stuff. So apparently it's very exciting. Professional development workshops, some that happen here, some that happen at schools, around different pieces of the methodology. What does inquiry look like? How do we add literacy skills into our science classrooms so that kids can write and talk about science to help make the meaning of the science they're doing? How do we provide model lessons and test these things out in the classrooms so that kids are writing more, so that kids are observing, using curriculum materials that we provide in the schools, often with a model lesson that one of us is teaching and leading, and then we discuss that and debrief that with the teachers afterwards. So those are some of the major pieces of the work that we're doing. But it's also about how do we create this idea of the museum as an extension of the school's campus, a home away from home. Whether it's having schools here and taking advantage of the exhibits in a way that makes just the right sense. It just takes one visit at just the right time to really move that curriculum forward, that unit forward. How do we create the opportunities for teachers to come together here in a collaborative way to talk with each other about a curriculum piece that they're working on? And most importantly, how do we get kids and parents of these schools here together sharing science and doing science? And that's like extremely important to us when we see this kind of thing happen. The excitement that the mom is sharing with her child from a project they did in their school, and they're sharing it at one of the community nights in this building. If we do all this right, then we should have great teachers that are excited about teaching science and feel comfortable teaching science with the material support that we can provide and the professional development support that we provide, and students that are truly engaged. So we started this 6 years ago or so with the 3 different buildings that are the Riverdale Interfaith School District. And I want to give special thanks to Noel Dick and Gail Keeling, who are both here. They've been with us for a long ride. We've had evaluators in their classrooms sitting down, talking what's happening. We've had evaluators interview their teachers, interview their students. So there's been a lot of work that went into this, and it's been great that we had such wonderful partners. So we had Riverdale Academy and Westshire Elementary School in West Fairleigh and Stanmore School in Fairleigh. Then then a couple of years ago, we added Tunbridge Central School 2 years ago, and so now we have Tunbridge as part of this small rural school partnership. And then last summer, we started working with the 4 schools in Caledonia Central Supervisory Union. So that includes Barnet and Walden, Danville, and Beecham. And that actually started because a former teacher who then became the principal at Westshire School then moved to Barnet. And he was too enthusiastic and excited about the work that we were doing while he was at Westshire. And so we sort of twisted our arm to somehow get up into Barnet. And once we're up in Barnet, then people were excited for us to start working with all 4 of our schools, which is great. And then this year we started working with both Lyme School in Lyme, New Hampshire, and Bedford Elementary. So these are the 10 schools that we're in right now. And we've learned a lot in the past. We've learned the importance of allowing time to really create that relationship and that trust if we're going to work together. The need for instructional materials, that is just been a real barrier to a lot of schools that are under-resourced. The need for the museum to be a home away from home, and a lot of teachers have mentioned this, specifically when they talk about they can come here and work with us about developing a curriculum on what we call curriculum coaching day. And the need for us to think more broadly about this. Throw out the model of this single idea that you solve a problem with this one solution, right? And to look at more of the ecology. We've had some indicators of accomplishment. We're moving things forward. There's, from our evaluation data, we see that teachers are more comfortable with doing and implementing inquiry in their classroom. We've reduced the barrier to access to quality materials. The time spent on science has increased in some of our schools. Teachers are using the museum in a way that they have not thought about using before. I mean, there are some, it's just wonderful seeing how teachers are integrating the museum's resources and the exhibits into their work in a meaningful way that makes sense. And we've even had little quantitative data points that says that, yes, this is actually pushing things forward as far as science assessment. The curious thing is, we do not come into saying our job is to increase your PISA scores, or in our case with our schools, our NECAP scores and doing common assessment programs. That's not what we're after. We're after kids being excited about science and being able to do science. And if they're excited to do science, and they'll learn science. That's what we're after. But there's a story in the museum world, and very quickly, Frank Oppenheimer was the founder of the Exploratorium. And there's a famous story about Frank. The Exploratorium is this huge museum, science museum in San Francisco, and those of us in the science museum world sort of look at the Exploratorium as a model for what science center should be. And there's a classic story of Frank where he's talking to someone, he pulls a letter out of his desk that he keeps in his desk, and it's old people now at this point. And he reads it, and it's from this older woman. He says, "Dear Mr. Oppenheimer, thank you so much for designing the Exploratorium. I loved it on my trip the other day. I was so happy. I went back down, so I got home, went down to my basement, and I fixed that blank that I needed to fix." And he puts down the letter and says, "You know, the funny thing is, we don't have any exhibits here about fixing lamps." Right? So even though it's not about increasing test scores, I'm really proud to say that Samuel Morey School has the second highest percentage of students that considered NECAP to be science in Vermont as highly as a distinguished proficiency. Proficiency with distinguishment, or something like that, right? And Westshire Elementary School on the Vermont side of the Upper Valley has the highest percentage of free and reduced lunch eligible students. Okay, a measurement of socioeconomic. And it also, on the Vermont side of the Upper Valley, has the highest NECAP scores. So that's pretty good. Behind them was Woodstock, Norwich, and then Sanborn is number 4. So that's great. So we have a lot of steps to keep on moving. We need to develop new ways of figuring our teacher network. We need to keep on collecting baseline data so that we can look at indicators of the amount of time spent on science, the amount of curriculum units that are being spent, what are the inquiries pieces that are going on. We need to test and start using new technologies, Web 2.0, social media, whatever it is, so that we can better create those teacher networks and support their schools. And we need to figure out how we're going to fund this thing. We've been funding it with various sponsors and funders, and at this point, we need to figure out, and this is a place where the community and others can become involved. How do we do that? In a few minutes, I'm going to ask some teachers and principals to come, but before I do, I just want to say thank you to the schools that have been working with us, Barnet and Danville and Lyme, Peacham, and Rivendell, Academy, Sanborn, Fairleigh, Bedford, Tunbridge, Bolton, and Westshire. Our funders and sponsors that have been funding the work that we've been doing. And then mostly the education staff here at the museum, the people that are in the schools, the people that are figuring out how best to support a teacher, how much support to give the teacher to sort of give that little bit of push, but not become the science teachers themselves. And that's Rachel Donegan and Mike Fensel and Amy Vanderboy and Rebecca Haynes. You guys just want to stand up so people know who you are. So if there's any questions, so thank you. What I'd like to do now is actually just invite, let's see, we have Hank Rupersberger, who's a principal teacher, and Meg Clayton, who's a teacher at Barnet, and Cindy Mosfield, a teacher at Barnet, Jean Slayton, a teacher from Tunbridge, and Gail Thielen, the principal at and head of elementary schools in Riverdale, principal at San Morin. If you guys come up and you've got some, we thought it'd be nice to have a little discussion, and if you have questions, you can have a chance to hear from them also.
And Jeff?
Oh, and Jeff Allen, principal of Lyme. Thank you, Amy.
Sorry, I wasn't Janet.
All right, we'll start with Gail. So I've been thinking about a couple of different questions, but one thing for Gail, I was wondering, can you sort of just talk about, since you've been part of the partnership from the beginning, and helped us sort of design it, and we work collaboratively trying to figure out what this will look like. What are some changes that you've seen in the last couple of years of it, but also how have you seen sort of change the culture of the school, or has it changed the culture?
Definitely has changed the culture. I think when we started this, what I was really thinking about was that, elementary classroom teachers, for the majority of them, not all of them, the majority do not have a strong background in science. They're very skilled in early literacy and math, but some who have a passion may have more than others. But for the most part, especially our primary teachers, they're teaching reading and writing, and they didn't have that strong background in science. And the museum really offered support for those teachers. And like Greg talked about, it increased their knowledge in the content area, but it also increased their ability to question students to develop great inquiry lessons. And when we started this, when Noel and Greg and everybody first started in the Rivendell district, we had all three schools together, and Greg started with engaging the teachers in an inquiry lesson, and so that they were really experiencing for themselves what true inquiry was like. And I think that it has definitely increased the enthusiasm for science in our schools, the confidence in teaching science in our teachers. One of the highlights was the partnership with Dartmouth, and we had science camp also, which had the Dartmouth students collaborating with the classroom teachers, and then once a week they would come in and they would teach the students and engage them in scientific inquiry that matched our curriculum. So this was never really an add-on. It was always part of our curriculum. And that, I thought, was so rich, and our students loved that, because what it also provided was mentors for our students. They saw these young adults who were excited about science, and that was, I think, one of the highlights. The other thing that I'd like to add is that what we try to do is, as we continue our partnership and teachers come here for professional days, they have mentors, and it's multifaceted like Greg was talking about. But one of the things that we try to do is we try to embed what we're doing in our school system with this, so that things work together. It's not, this is over here, so on this day, let's do some science professional development, and on this day, let's do something else. So like right now, we're working on deep intellectual conversations and rich academic language in our classrooms. So we're using the science curriculum and the model and the teachers and everything, just to further that in our schools. So I think the more that we can make it all fit together, makes the teachers feel better, so they don't think that they have 4 or 5 different initiatives going at the same time, and they see a connection. And I think when students see a connection in things, then it's more meaningful for them.
Thanks. So Jean September, and she's been doing a fair amount of work with Amy in your classroom. So how has that sort of changed either what you're doing, or how has Amy pushed you and pushed you to think about your science?
Well, Amy pushed me because I'm one of the teachers Gail started to talk about that really doesn't have a background in science and really doesn't love science like a lot of you people do. So my philosophy over the year, I've taught it every year, and I just say to myself, okay, I have to do science now because I'm so uncomfortable with it, to be honest. That's just the honest truth. So this year I started a unit of force in motion, which involves ramps and balls and cars. And I'm thinking about this and like, okay, how do I have a classroom of 3, 4, and 5 grade children? I have probably 13 in the room at a time. How do I teach a lesson, meaningful lesson, without it being chaotic? Well, I'm just thinking they're just going to have fun and that's it. So I did one of the, I came to a workshop. I came to a workshop in the fall with some other teachers, and we actually planned a unit. From there, I went back and made daily plans. And I just had lacked so much confidence before trying this with that unit plan and with talking to the other teachers from that one workshop day. So that's what really helped me a lot. Also, Amy came in a couple of times and demonstrated a lesson, and just seeing her work with such enthusiasm and knowledge and everything else that, she went home and the next day said, okay, now I know how to do it. And, it certainly wasn't as good as she was, but the kids are having involved with it, and, I feel like I know how to teach the lesson a lot better than I did on my own. And you guys provided materials that we didn't have at our school.
So Hank, you can take on the role of trying to not just work in your own school of 30 or 35 students, K-5, but also from the Caledonia Central Supervisor Union-wide, and trying to help sort of bring together a group of teachers and create a network of teachers as well as support science across the supervisory union. So how does this program fit into that?
Well, we are now at the very end of our first year of working with the Montshire, and at the very end of working with 4 wonderful team leaders from the 4 different schools. Cindy Rosedale is here this evening, Christopher Posa could not be here, Tammy Russell, and Betty Young from Peacham. And the success of our model has really been the core of those team leaders and the relationship, the network that they've been able to establish amongst themselves, as well as with their own colleagues within their buildings. It has been also a very successful year in that Greg and his wonderful staff have not only been, as you've heard throughout the last hour, have been in the classrooms and helping elbow to elbow with teachers and modeling some of these wonderful inquiry processes, but Greg and others have helped us as a team to collaborate and develop new ideas and new ways of thinking about ourselves as science leaders. So I think that the Montshire has been invaluable not only from providing the resources, not only providing the expertise, but also trying to think out of the box in a much larger scale than just a single school and say, how can we develop an economy of scale to really make this work? And so Greg has already mentioned some of the next steps that the Montshire needs to take, and it's not a surprise that it's many of the things that we're talking about. And that is, how do we define our success across the SU? How do we start to incorporate technology and those 2.0 tools that we all love and rely on so much? We're thrilled this year, honestly, when we talk about network, we talk about those relationships, that when you're as isolated as we are, to go from going face-to-face at a meeting where we have to travel 25 and 30 minutes to come over to go to school, to all of a sudden to be able to go to meeting, and there's Greg, there's the other teachers, along with their team leaders, all of a sudden the magic of that moment really starts to hit us. So we're starting to think creatively about how to network with each other to build those closer relationships as well. So Greg the Montshire has been there and right along with us trying to figure that out.
Yeah, and building those relationships is the only way that's going to be sustainable. It can't just be the Montshire. So speaking of science leaders and people in your schools, Cindy, as an experienced science leader, what are some of the things that you've noticed and that may be working about the partnership environment? And what are some indicators in your own head about how that works?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Greg and Hank for the nice segue into this piece. I've been working in Barnet for 8 years. I've been instructing middle school science there for that entire time. And while we have had school-wide efforts and district-wide efforts to vertically and horizontally align our curriculum and move forward in science instruction, none have ever been as successful, as systemic, and as forward-moving as what we have done this year. Having the teacher leaders come together and work in support of each other in collaboration with the Montshire as well as other local institutions. We have a Fairbanks Museum who has also come on board and helped us out. We're tapping into a larger network, accessing professional development through that larger network, bringing it into the school, and also working with these professionals outside of the school to inform our knowledge, instruction, and practice. As Greg alluded earlier, building capacity among the teachers is probably the most important thing. And Hank mentioned having these digital meetings that we had never had before. And not only are we doing science, we're developing science units. We are planning thoughtfully for what was coming up this year as well as what's coming up in the future years. And those conversations had never happened before. So after 8 years of working with many talented individuals doing the best we can, we have a system in place that allows us to be quite successful and forward-moving with a clear agenda.
So maybe you can pass on to Meg. And so we had at least one curriculum in the fall that was going to be a 6-week unit. Did it go 6 weeks?
No, it lasted till March.
Yeah, so what was the importance of having something there in your hands for helping you teach science? The role of that unit?
That unit was really helpful because, like Jean, I'm one of those teachers who doesn't have a whole lot of science experience. And what scared me the most about teaching the inquiry science, which is something I really hadn't done, was pulling together all the materials and prepping it and setting it up. And my science block is a half an hour each day, except I have an hour on Thursday afternoons. And that's in between 2 math classes. So having that, it wasn't just getting the box with the materials, but there's also a manual that provides a lot of science information that helps me to understand better what I was instructing the students. And we all came as a group of teachers from our district, 5th and 6th grade teachers, to the Montshire, where we were not only given the boxes, but the lessons were modeled for us initially. So we together went through the experience that our students would be going through. And that was very useful because we got familiar. We got to mess around and play with what was in the box. And we got to experience how exciting it is to dive in and ask questions and wonder about things. And all of that was an excellent way to open it up and make it possible. And to be honest, that box full of little jars that I just had to open up and measure out and set out on trays with the kids made it much less threatening for me. And it gave me a lot of information that I was able to work with so that I was learning. The kids were really engaged and diving in, and it was very hands-on, and they were having a good time. But along with that, and this may segue into your next question, it was more than just getting a kit of materials in a book filled with good content information. The scaffolding of how it was rolled out and presented to the CCSU team of 5th and 6th grade teachers here initially at the Montshire with excellent modeling of the lesson for us. And then after we dove in and played around with it a little and started getting, I have to admit I got a little frightened initially with having my kids in that half an hour have chemicals out and be measuring things that are getting hot or getting cold. And Greg came up and modeled a lesson. And that was beautiful because it helped me see where maybe I had too many kids together or I wasn't letting them play around enough. I got a chance to sort of calibrate myself against his model lesson. And that was excellent. And then he came back again towards the end of the unit. And there was debriefing afterwards with the other 6th grade teacher who was also, like me, not super comfortable with teaching science. But by the time he came up the second time, I think it was more of a collaboration between us as we were working with the students. The kids really were excited about knowing someone from Montshire was coming up to work with us. They looked forward to Greg's visits. With our second unit that we planned, and it wasn't in a box, that came out of the collaboration that Cindy and Hank were referring to, where we met and we were given release time to sit and spend a lot of talking time together as a team to design our own unit. And we were struggling a bit, I was struggling a bit with how to make that real to my particular students. And Greg said, well, we'll send someone up there. And Rachel came and brought buckets full of aquatic invertebrates that the kids, we wouldn't have had those. Maybe I could have gone out and found them, but that kind of, it jump-started me into seeing those kids diving into those bugs or jumping away and screaming from the bugs, getting the microscopes out. We don't have 6 microscopes to set up in the classroom, but they came along. And the kids were really, really into it. And the following week, Rachel, we went out and we've got a seed museum now. So we went out on the nature trail and we gathered our samples and they did their scientific drawings. And all of that was possible because I was given the confidence as an instructor to see the modeling of that and see that, maybe we don't have the microscopes there, but we've got a bunch of hand lenses. And maybe I don't have all of the jars that are in the kit, but as a team we were able to put our heads together, and I think we came up with a really nice unit by having the time and the collaboration to put into it. And it all sort of built from that initial kit that made me feel a lot more comfortable.
So Jeff, as an experienced principal, you're really excited about this program, so great to be along. What were you looking for? What pieces of it excited you about?
Sure. So we came to this a little bit maybe differently than other schools. When I started live school, I established kind of 2 priorities for the school. One is foreign language starting in kindergarten, and the other was inquiry-based science. And so we were fortunate in that we now have foreign language beginning in kindergarten, and we now have inquiry-based science. But really what we were looking at was how do we get, so my background is I've taught science and I also have taught English. So I guess I'm kind of up here like, how can people not love science? And I'm also, I see the two as so inherently connected. You're doing the same things. You're observing, you're analyzing, you're interpreting, you're forecasting, you're doing all those things. You're doing it in English, you're doing it in science, and having taught inquiry-based science, it's true that in the lower school, you really, there's so much attention being given to math and language arts that you have people that say, if we're going to hire a teacher in the lower school, they've got to really be able to teach language arts, and they've got to really be able to teach math. And I'm like, and science. And the big thing is that for a lot of us, when we went and we experienced science, it was not inquiry-based science. It was classroom, as I call it, cookbook science, where if you follow the steps in the lab, you will get the same result every single time. And so all we're practicing here is kids following instructions. So we get kids that think science is about following instructions, when science is about getting messy, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes, and coming up with solutions. And so when we started talking about how do we get inquiry-based science into school, there was 2 things. One is we need to be able to work with teachers to have them be able to teach that. And that means not only teaching it, but having had the opportunity to experience it. Because it's very hard to teach something if you haven't experienced it yourself as a learner. And the other piece is to get it immediately in front of kids. So yes, we could have gone the model of, okay, so we'll get a group of our teachers and we'll send them off to, there's a couple of really amazing places in California that focus in on inquiry-based science, where it starts with questions, and the curriculum is built off of the questions, because, you know, basically, what are elementary school kids, but like innate scientists? They got all kinds of questions. They got abundance of questions, and that's what scientists really is. So, you know, we could have gone that route, but really what we want to say is, no, we want to get it right in front of kids. And so we said, okay, well that means we want to bring the training to the classroom. So we're going to be providing that high-quality, inquiry-based science to kids simultaneously while we're training teachers. We're not waiting to train the teachers getting comfortable with it, and then eventually getting it into the classrooms. And so that model was kind of what we were looking at, and it just, you know, I didn't know about the Montshire's program at that point in time, and we've been coming to the Montshire for so long, and then somebody's like, well, you should talk to Greg, because I think they're doing some stuff like this. So I was like, all right, well, yeah, that sounds good. So Greg and I tried for about a month and a half to connect, and finally one day, we got a time, we showed up at my office, and I said, okay, so here's what I'm thinking. I'm trying to get this, you know, staff development and inquiry-based science program in the school where we're not only, you know, giving teachers the opportunity to kind of step back and be learners in their classroom from people that understand inquiry-based science, but also can participate as students in that process, and the kids are getting that same exposure at the same time. And so we started talking about this, and it was amazing. So like Greg, I had a couple meetings before Greg with people talking about this, and they kind of looked and they were kind of like, what the heck is this guy talking about this out in the left field? And I'm sitting there across from Greg, and Greg is finishing my sentence for me. So it was absolutely just an amazing process where I was like, all right, yes. And I'm thinking to myself, isn't it amazing that, again, in this region, we have this resource right here. And for us, that's been just fantastic. So we're getting that exposure to the kids immediately. We're also doing staff development. We're also talking about changing the look of science from cookbook science to inquiry-based science, which is really important. And then, you know, part of that is also, you know, people here talk about hands-on or place-based education. Inquiry-based education ties in all of those dynamics. You know, the fact that we're able to do it with a local resource for the Lime School has been made all the difference. It's been great. We just had I don't know if anyone, next year you'll have to remember, put on your calendars, we just had completed Da Vinci Day, which I don't know if anyone heard about, where we built trebuchets and we got people's, and I have a Trebuchet shirt where I was standing out and I got hit by water balloons with dye in it, so I have a shirt like this kind of with pink and blue and orange and stuff like that. But I mean, it's about getting kids involved in science and active in science and discovering things and not telling them what they think the solution should be, but posing the question or giving them opportunity to investigate the question. And you know, I think that Montshire is going to be the means by which we can make sure that that happens every day in our classrooms.
Does anyone have any questions for you? Have questions for you guys? We'd love to open up to the audience. Questions?
Great. The learning from your bar chart, which had Finland all the way on the left, do we know anything about what it is that they do that is different? Is it similar to this?
There's people looking at that. It ends up that it's a national curriculum, so they're all on the same page. And Finnish teachers, not that they're the super high paid teachers, but it is a privilege to be a teacher in that country. The profession is highly esteemed. You know, the Teach for America, whether it's a great program or a not so great program, it has a variety of things we can argue about it. But Teach for America has kids from our best schools competing tooth and nail to get into that program. So that's one thing that Finland does.
Greg, we should also mention that in Finland there's a high level of federal support for their local science museum and its role in the schools.
Right.
Big commitment.
And schools themselves.
And the schools themselves.
Yeah.
Looking at this from the other direction, I'd like to ask people up front or the people in the audience who have opinions about this, what would it take to keep up this kind of initiative? You know, what's the next little push that would do the most good in your settings? Be the most helpful?
I'll speak for us. I think that one thing is that just broadening the conversation about the role of elementary education to include inquiry, reasoning skills, problem-solving skills, communication, all these things that not only take place in language arts and math, but also in all disciplines. And being able to look at the question of not what subject matter is most important, but what are the essential skills and abilities that go across subject area that are important, and emphasize those over specific and insular subject matter.
I'll add, often it's easy to say we can't do this because of time, resources, constraints. One of the strongest premises in inquiry science is how, and it's not that we can't do it or we have these limitations, but how can we resolve these challenges? And as Hank alluded, we overcame several challenges as we tried to work through this. Some of them are geographical, some of them are financial, some of them are infrastructure. Every classroom in our district had a different time period, so Meg spoke of 5 30-minute classes or 4 30-minute classes and 1 50-minute class. When you're trying to implement a systemic model between the schools, and every school has a different schedule, and well, that's her schedule. 5th and 6th grade in another school has science once a week for an hour and a half, and another class has it twice a week for 45 minutes. You just have to keep coming back to how, not whoops, we have these obstacles, just move beyond.
And I think also it also takes a trust in that it's worth the long-term investment. It's not going to be for most schools a quick turnaround. So one thing it takes is a commitment by the school to buy the professional release day time, which is a real commitment. You know, if I have 5 teachers here working with us for a day, that's 5 teachers that are out of classrooms. So there's a trade-off there, as well as a real cost. But it's not just for that year, but that long-term effort and recognition.
Well, and I was going to speak to that as well, because I'm not teaching science next year. So I've been, I've invested a lot of time and myself in it, and my district has also, but there will be someone else teaching science to 5th graders at my school next year. So there has to be that long-term commitment, because the system itself isn't static, and the teacher next year teaching 5th grade science hasn't been part of that this year. So there needs to be a way for me to be part of the continuation of that, even though I'm going to be strictly teaching literacy next year. And as you were saying, pulling that literacy science connection there, I will be able to do that with my next phase of what I'm doing in our school. But the long-term vision of knowing that the relationship's long-term, and hopefully the commitment on the district's level is long-term, means that you can accommodate for those kinds of short-term fluctuations that are pretty natural.
And you also alluded to that it needs to be school-wide to allow for that sustainability and that continuation.
Yeah. Your bullseye was around increasing student enthusiasm and understanding of science. How do you measure that success? So you're saying not teaching for science scores.
Well,
so what is your measure of success?
So there's science score is a measure, and it's fine to use as one measure. The worry is that we use that as the only measure. So I have no issues at all at looking at NCAP scores. I just want to make sure that we're not designing our curriculum and our learning around NCAP scores. So that's an indicator, right? Other indicators include how many students, and we aren't doing this kind of stuff because this kind of research, because this is very long-term, longitudinal research. But as a society, and what National Science Foundation will fund or the Academic Science will fund, they'll look at what percentage of students go into science and engineering as a freshman, and what's the attrition rate coming out of that as a senior in college, right? So what are our graduate, what are our degrees that we're giving, who's getting those degrees? Those are the kind of things that you end up looking at. But that, and then also, the other piece is listening to the teachers, and when I have a principal that says, the teachers came in during vacation because they just could not because they're worried too much about the kids' playing experiments the kids started before vacation. And so now the teacher's in there every day worrying about that. That kind of enthusiasm is sort of an indicator of the teacher's desire to work with their kids. So there's both anecdotal stuff and then there is quantitative stuff. But most of the quantitative stuff is stuff that we ourselves, we aren't set up, and nor do we need to be measuring as long as other people are. Yeah, great.
Question, how much more expansion needs to be done in the schools that you're currently working with? Or maybe a different question related is, how much effort has to go into maintaining this program on perhaps the part of the Montshire plus the part of the school?
So to maintain working with 10 schools or the districts we're working right now is taking approximately 1 to 1.25 FTEs of our time, if that's the kind of question you're actually asking. Yeah. And that is our maintenance level. And in Caledonia, we've been focused on 4 through 8. 3 through 8, right. We haven't worked with the primary ages yet, and we need to end up doing that. Because I do believe that it needs to be school-wide and not just a grade. And so that'll take a little bit more effort. And then, at what point, we're still trying to figure this out, at what point do we need to expand the program enough so that we have a sort of enough people that when we have a certain seminar, that we can be efficient with our use. So we're not ending up doing a frequent coaching day with three third grade teachers, but it ends up being 10 or 12, and you need that certain amount of density to make it more efficient.
I would say that from our case, we would be looking for more involvement from Montshire, because I think that as you whet people's appetite for this, the more quickly you can respond to that appetite and provide that additional instruction and opportunity to work with the teaching staff that comes in, the more rapid transformative nature of this is going to be for the teachers in their classrooms. So they start to think of themselves as scientists. Spend any time analyzing literature. You're using the same brain and the same systems for observations for science, and getting people to say, yeah, you know what? We're sentient beings. We can interpret things and make judgments, and to train that in a scientific reasoning and a scientific way makes people say that they can see the science in everything. They can see the science in literature, and that is when we know we're there, because we're going to say, hey, what's the difference between the observations, analysis, interpretation that we're doing over this piece of literature versus what we're doing in terms of the reactions of different photo process of plants, photosynthesis. So I think that's really where we want to see that transfer.
I just wanted to mention two things as a follow-up to that. Greg mentioned earlier, I'm looking at this model as a form of ecology. And we also have used the word capacity, and how do you build capacity. So I think in order for these programs to be able to sustain themselves, there has to be a certain capacity of leadership, a certain capacity of professional development, professional knowledge and expertise. But I think the other piece that needs to also be in place is the ability to reach out and network with others. And I'm not just saying within the RSU, within Caledonia Central. I'm talking about us networking with other participating schools within the Montshire program, or even for that matter, reaching out to other schools in the state, the country, and the world. As Greg mentioned earlier, this lifelong learning and this lust for going out there and being world citizens, it's on our very doorstep right now, and that's one of the skills that we need to be teaching and modeling to our students.
So, as we've been in it probably the longest, but like you said, there's teachers changing grades, there's teachers learning, there's new teachers come in, and I think how we look at it is this is who we are. When you come to work with a Rivendell school, you come to work with a Montshire school partnership. It's our norm, it's who we are, and there's really not a choice as far as not. But the other thing is, so there's a need for the new teachers, first-year teachers or what have you, that really need support. But the other thing is that I've noticed is the teachers that have been working with Mike or working with Rachel or working with anybody the longest, it's like the more enthusiastic they get about science, the more they know about science, the more, it's not that they need more support, the more they want to know, or hopefully they'll want to go even to that next level with the students. You know, they started here, here's the kit, here's the questioning, here's how to do it. But as they become comfortable with the content, I think they want to know more. And they want the next steps for themselves also.
And we found at the end of this year, so we had our last team meeting last week, and part of our action plan that was just within our own school, we surveyed the staff members that participated and asked for feedback from them, and the number one feedback was that I would like to participate more in the offerings that already exist at the Montshire. So part of several of the different conversations involve how do you sustain this. Montshire already has in place a number of opportunities that, as Greg mentioned, could be taken advantage of more, or have a denser population that they're serving with them. So that's part of it. Part of also collecting data and determining how best to measure success or the wow factor or the interest and engagement of the students is collecting data informally. And part of our evaluation process within our school involves surveying all the students from 4th through 8th grade who participated in just a quick 5-question survey. What did you do with Amy, Greg, Rachel, or Mike that had an impact on your learning and makes you, what's one thing you know now that you didn't know before, or what would you like to see happen? And they, in turn, can help us develop those additional questions and next steps.
I have a question about funding. As a school board member, I know of 3 pots of money that we can go to, and that's taxes, we can go to grants, or we can go to private dollars. Which one of those 3 has been most successful for you to get the dollars? Where should we put our energies?
We established 5 years ago the Life Fund, which is the Lyme Innovation for Education Fund. It's a private foundation that we raise the money to cover the cost of the Spanish program and the inquiry-based science program that we have. It would be difficult to go to the tax base with something that's unproven. This is a way that we can demonstrate the value and necessity before we go to the request of the taxpayer. Because ultimately we want to move education faster than maybe the appetite for increasing taxes. Maybe I think there's a greater appetite for one than the other. And I'm not going to tell you which one it is, but you might be able to figure it out. So we've gone with the private fundraiser. So I spend a bit of time on my week doing that.
How many FTEs?
I think I'm 4 FTEs at this point.
And grants are good for short-term solutions, but there are a few that are good for long-term solutions. So it's relatively accessible to access, or relatively easy to access a grant that can start you up, but it's very difficult to find one that will sustain you. So I think grant funding is good for short-term or one-time purchases, but it's much harder for longer-term programs such as this one.
Yeah, I should just make clear that as we develop this program, we have not charged participating schools. We have tried to figure out on our own side of things how to support this startup model. So the staff time and other resources that Greg has talked about have largely come from private foundations, private gifts that we have raised. We don't have any continuous source. We don't have any big major source. We scrap and look around and put together as much as we can to try to hold this together. In the long run, the partnership in terms of funding, we're going to have this very conversation you're talking about, is how do we collectively figure out how to fund these things if they're important. And Lion, you've been very helpful with starting to contribute from that fund, and that's a wonderful model. But we would have to expand that kind of thinking. But to get this started, we felt like we can't come to the schools and say, we have this wonderful idea, do you want to pay for it? We have to figure out how to support some of that work, begin together to develop what the idea and the partnership is, and then together in the long run figure out how are we going to support whatever it is we as a collective group feel needs to go in to continue this kind of work.
And that's really about the efficiency of it, because we could have chosen on the route of creating our own. But the fact is that if we can, instead of building our own wheel, utilize and strengthen an existing wheel, I think the entire region benefits, education benefits. And so that's one reason we decided to go this route. This is one reason why when Greg and I met, I was saying, okay, so we have this money, we want to do this, and we want to participate in helping build not only the capacity that we have in our school, but also the capacity of Montshire. And so as I'm going around raising money, one of the things I'm also talking about is this partnership. And we put a very, very long and visible banner to it, that it's the Montshire Lyme Science Partnership that's doing this. And part of what we see as our responsibility for is not only sustaining our own program, but also helping to sustain a program that's going to serve all of us, not just those of us who are in our school, but as stewards of education, that we try to pay forward to a modest degree what exists for other schools as well.
I'll take one more question. I know Mary had a hand up.
Things have shifted away from my question, but let me just ask it briefly. I'm very impressed with what you're doing. My question has to do with whether you envision at all becoming involved in a K-12 kind of connection with science education in any of the schools, or is that just...
For us at the Montshire, at this point we're not. At this point our strength, both our area of expertise and also the place where we see the biggest holes is in K-8. And that's where I think we can be most effective. I think there's other organizations, and they may not be regional right here, but I think that if we can really take a big chunk and do the K-8 piece well, I think we're going to.
I guess I didn't ask it quite clearly. Having had the Dartmouth kids involved sounded like a very positive aspect. I'm not sure if that's still happening. I was thinking more in terms of the conversations, K-12, in terms of their building science and education. So I understand that you're not about to go into high school in the same way, but pulling in there.
And some of the schools, the school curriculum committees and the science committees are often school-wide K-12. And in some schools it becomes, Rivendell Academy is now a middle school and high school model, and the 7 to 12 is actually shared teachers. So there's some of that happening. I don't think that has any.
Well, I think one of the fascinating things is that we talk about capacity of us as teaching faculty. You build the capacity and appetite of a child to really engage their imagination, their inquiry, and their curiosity into science. There's a tremendous back pressure going for those students as they enter into high school to be of transformative power within the high school, where you're building advocacy and kids are saying, yeah, you know what, I'm going to ask these questions as opposed to just kind of sit complacently and receive information. They want to get involved. You get those kids in a high school classroom, and I can tell you as a high school science teacher, it changes what you do. It's great.
Great. What we're going to end up doing is thank you all for coming. And we have a reception right outside, so please join us. We're all going to be around for a bit more, and we'd love to have more discussion. So if you have questions, I'm Phil, and Dave is here, and so thanks for coming in.